Some deals cost more than money. They cost everything you thought you were. In the winter of 1883, a dying man made an offer that would shatter every rule a decent woman lived by. Edwin Hale needed an heir. Mara Keaton needed a miracle. What he proposed wasn't marriage, it was survival dressed in wedding vows. But when desperation meets opportunity in the frozen hills of Kentucky, morality becomes a luxury neither can afford. This is their story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this tale travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end. You won't believe where this goes. The physician's hands were steady, but his words came out wrong. Too careful, too slow, like he was defusing a bomb instead of delivering news about a child. Mrs. Keaton, I need you to understand what we're facing here. Mara stood by the narrow bed where her son lay sleeping, his 9-year-old body so thin the blanket barely rose with his breathing. The room smelled like camphor and something sour she couldn't name. Fear, maybe. Desperation had a smell too, she'd learned. It lived in her clothes now, in her hair. I understand plenty, Dr. Morehouse. Her voice came out harder than she meant. You've been understanding me right into the poorhouse for 3 months. What I need is for you to fix him. Morehouse set his black bag on the washstand, not meeting her eyes. He was a small man, tidy, the kind who kept his mustache trimmed even when making house calls to people who couldn't pay. The treatment exists. There's a specialist in Louisville who's had success with cases like Thomas's, but the cost, how much? Between the surgery, the recovery care, the medications, he finally looked at her. $400, possibly more. The number hit her like a fist. Mara's hand found the bedpost, gripped it. $400. She'd worked every job she could find since Robert died. Laundry, mending, cleaning houses, until her knuckles bled. She'd sold everything that wasn't nailed down. The small dairy farm Robert left her brought in barely enough to keep them fed, and that was before Thomas got sick. She had $17.30. And without it? She asked, though she already knew. Morehouse's silence was answer enough. How long? Months? Maybe less. He picked up his bag. I'm sorry, Mrs. Keaton. Truly. If there were another way, Get out. He paused at the door. There are charitable institutions. If you were willing to I said get out, but after he left, Mara sat in the chair beside Thomas's bed and didn't cry. She'd learned that too. Crying was another luxury. Instead, she watched her boy sleep, his fever-bright cheeks, the way his breath came shallow and quick. He looked like Robert. Same dark hair, same stubborn chin, same way of trusting the world to be fair when the world had never once earned that trust. Mama? His eyes were open, glassy with fever. I'm here, sweetheart. I heard the doctor. I'm not stupid. 9 years old and already carrying weight no child should lift. Mara smoothed his hair back. You're not stupid. You're the smartest boy in Kentucky. Am I dying? The question sat between them like a living thing. She could lie. She probably should lie. But Thomas had Robert's eyes too, and those eyes could spot dishonesty a mile off. Not if I have anything to say about it. You don't have $400. I'll get it. How? Good question. Great question. The kind of question that kept her awake every night, staring at ceiling cracks and doing math that never added up right. You let me worry about that. You just rest. He closed his eyes again, trusting her completely. That trust was worse than anything, heavier than debt, sharper than grief. It meant she had to do something, anything, even if that something burned her life down to find it. The letter came 2 days later. Mara almost threw it away. She didn't recognize the handwriting, cramped, angular, the penmanship of someone who'd learned to write late and never got comfortable with it. No return address. The envelope was good quality, though, thick paper that spoke of money. She opened it standing at the kitchen table, still wearing her work dress from Mrs. Patterson's house, where she'd spent the morning scrubbing floors for 50 cents. Mrs. Keaton, I have a proposition that may interest you. It concerns your son's medical situation and a matter of mutual benefit. I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss this in person. I am not well enough to travel easily, but I will send my man with a wagon tomorrow at noon if you are willing to hear me out. This is not charity, this is business. Edwin Hale. She read it 3 times. Edwin Hale. Everyone in Barton County knew that name. The Hale farm sprawled across the best bottomland for 20 miles. Hundreds of acres of tobacco and corn, timber rights, water access. Edwin's father had built it from nothing, and Edwin had doubled it. People said he had more money than sense, though Mara had never heard anyone say he was stupid. Mean, maybe. Hard. The kind of man who counted every penny and expected every person to earn their keep. She also knew he was sick. The rumors had been circulating for months, something in his lungs, something that wouldn't let go. He'd never married, had no children. His brother Thomas Hale, not her Thomas, the other Thomas, the one people spat after saying his name, stood to inherit everything. That part was famous too. Thomas Hale drank, gambled, kept company with women who weren't his wife, because he didn't have a wife, just a string of disasters and debts. Give him the Hale farm, and he'd run it into the ground inside a year. A matter of mutual benefit. Mara set the letter down and looked around her kitchen. The cabin was small but clean, one room with a sleeping loft Thomas couldn't climb to anymore. Robert had built it himself when they married, every board and nail a promise of the life they'd make. That was 20 years ago. The promises had turned out different than advertised. What could Edwin Hale possibly want from her that would be worth $400? Only one way to find out. The wagon arrived exactly at noon. The driver was an older black man named Samuel who touched his hat to her and helped her up without saying much. Thomas was sleeping, watched over by Mrs. Chen from the next farm over. Mara wore her best dress, her only dress that didn't have patches, and felt like a fool doing it. The ride took 40 minutes through country that got progressively richer. Split-rail fences gave way to painted ones, rocky fields to rolling pasture. The Hale house sat on a rise like it was surveying its kingdom. 3 stories, white clapboard, black shutters, a porch that wrapped around the whole front. Money in every board. Samuel helped her down and led her to the door without knocking. Inside, the air smelled like beeswax and tobacco. The floors gleamed. A woman in a gray dress, housekeeper Mara guessed, nodded to her and gestured toward a room off the main hall. Edwin Hale sat in a leather chair by the fire. She'd expected sick. She hadn't expected dying. He was maybe 50, tall, even sitting down, with shoulders that had been broad before the illness ate at him. His face was all angles now, skin stretched too tight, eyes sunk deep, but burning with something fierce. He wore a good suit that hung wrong, tailored for a bigger man. When he breathed, she could hear it, a wet rattle that spoke of things coming apart inside. "Mrs. Keaton?" His voice was rough but strong. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Hale." She stayed standing, didn't know what else to do with her hands. "Sit, please. I don't stand on ceremony, can't afford to. Standing takes too much out of me these days." A grim smile. "Margaret will bring coffee if you want it." "I'm fine." She sat. The chair was too soft, too nice. Everything in this room cost more than her whole cabin. The fire popped. Edwin watched her with those burning eyes, taking her measure the way men did at market when they were considering livestock. "You're wondering what this is about," he said. "Among other things." "I'll be direct. I don't have time for anything else." He shifted, winced, controlled it. "I'm dying. Consumption. The doctors give me 6 months if I'm lucky. I'm not feeling particularly lucky." Mara said nothing. What was there to say? "I have no wife, no children, no heir. When I die, this farm, everything I've built, everything my father built, goes to my brother Thomas. You know Thomas?" "I know of him." "Then you know he's a disaster with expensive taste and no sense. He'll sell half the land to pay his debts, mortgage the rest, and drink the proceeds. 20 years of work? Gone. The people who depend on this farm, the families who've worked here for generations, they'll be out on their asses inside a year." He stopped to cough, a deep tearing sound that went on too long. Margaret appeared with a glass of water. He waved her off but took the glass, sipped, got control of himself. "I need an heir," he said. "A legitimate child who can inherit. That means I need a wife, and I need her pregnant before I die." The room got very quiet. Mara felt something cold slide down her spine. "You're not serious." "I'm completely serious." He set the glass down. "I've thought about this from every angle. I need someone intelligent enough to run this place after I'm gone. Someone with something to lose who won't just take the money and run. Someone desperate enough to consider what I'm offering. You want to buy yourself a broodmare. I want to make a business arrangement with a woman who needs money fast and isn't in a position to be choosy about where it comes from." His eyes didn't leave hers. "Your son is dying. The treatment costs more than you'll earn in 5 years. I'm offering to pay for all of it. The surgery, the recovery, everything. In exchange, you marry me, get pregnant, and give me an heir. After that, you'll inherit this farm with full legal rights. You and your children will be provided for." Set for life. Mara stood up so fast the chair scraped. "You're out of your mind. Sit down, Mrs. Keaton. Don't tell me what to do. You think you can just, hire a woman like she's day labor? Put a child in her like she's livestock?" "I think," Edwin said, still calm, still watching her, "that you came here because you're out of options. I think you've already tried everything else. I think the letter in your pocket, the one from the Louisville specialist, the one Dr. Morehouse gave you yesterday, says your son has maybe 3 months without intervention." He paused. "I think you'd do just about anything to save him, and I'm giving you a way to do it." She wanted to hit him. Her hand actually twitched with it. Instead, she stayed standing, breathing hard, feeling something inside her crack. "Why me?" "You're the right age, old enough that no one will ask too many questions about a late marriage, young enough that pregnancy is still possible. You're widowed, respectable, known for working hard. And most importantly, you need this enough to take it seriously." He gestured to the room. "I don't need love, Mrs. Keaton. I don't have time for it. I need results. You deliver those results, you'll never have to worry about money again. Neither will your son. Neither will the child you give me." "This is insane." "This is practical." Another cough, shorter this time. "You have 3 months to watch your boy die slow, or you can marry me tomorrow and save his life. Everything else is just noise." Mara's legs felt weak. She sat back down, not because he told her to, but because standing was suddenly too much. "I need time to think." "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I'll find someone else." He wasn't bluffing. She could hear it in his voice. He'd made his decision, done his planning. This was just execution. "The wagon will come at 9. If you're ready, bring your son. The surgery can be arranged within a week. If you're not ready, don't bother coming back. And if I agree, what are the terms? Marriage, consummation, pregnancy, birth. After the child is born, you inherit everything equally. The will is already drawn up. You'll have full legal authority to run this farm, make all decisions. I'll put it in writing that your son is to be treated as my own child for purposes of education and provision. You'll want a lawyer to review everything. I'll pay for that too." "How generous." "It's not generosity, it's insurance." He leaned forward slightly. "I need to know this farm will be in hands that won't destroy it. You need money you can't get any other way. We're both trapped, Mrs. Keaton. I'm just offering us both a way out." She looked at him, really looked. Past the dying body, past the burning eyes, past the cold calculation. What she saw there wasn't cruelty exactly. It was something harder to name, desperation wearing different clothes. A man watching everything he'd built about to crumble, willing to do anything to stop it. She understood that. She lived it every day. "This is the most indecent proposal I've ever heard," she said. "I know." Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "But you're still here." Mara didn't sleep that night. She sat at Thomas's bedside and watched him breathe, counting each inhale and exhale like they were coins she couldn't afford to lose. The specialist's letter sat on the table, unfolded, read so many times she had it memorized. Without immediate intervention, the prognosis is poor. With proper surgical care and post-operative treatment, survival rates exceed 70%. I cannot stress enough the urgency of the situation. 70%. Those were good odds considering, better than the alternative, which was 0. But the cost. Not just money. Everything else that came with Edwin Hale's proposal. marriage to a dying man, pregnancy, carrying a child conceived like a business transaction, becoming the kind of woman people would talk about in whispers, the kind who married for money, who sold herself. Except that wasn't quite right, was it? She wouldn't be selling herself. She'd be trading her body, her future, her reputation, all of it for Thomas's life. Was that selling, or was that just another kind of work? Robert would have hated this. He'd been a good man, the kind who believed in doing things right, marrying for love, building slow and steady. Look where that got him, dead at 43 from a stupid accident, leaving his wife and son with nothing but debts and a farm too small to matter. Doing things right was a luxury too. Thomas stirred, opened his eyes. Can't sleep. Just thinking. About the man? She'd told him about the meeting, not the details, just that someone had a proposal that might help. Thomas was too smart to lie to about the big things. Yeah, about the man. Is he bad? Mara considered that. No, not bad. Just practical. Will he help me? The question cut right through everything else. All the moral calculations, the shame, the fear, cut right down to what mattered. Yes, she said. He will. Then you should do it. Thomas said it like it was simple. Maybe for him it was. Whatever he wants, you should do it. I don't want to die, Mama. You're not going to die. Promise? She took his hand, 9 years old and asking for promises about things no one could promise. But she said it anyway because sometimes promises mattered more than truth. I promise. Well, the wagon came at 9. Mara had one bag packed, clothes for her and Thomas, a few things of Robert's she couldn't bear to leave, a photograph from their wedding that was worth nothing to anyone but her. Mrs. Chen stood in the yard crying, promising to watch the cabin, to keep the stock fed. Mara hugged her and felt nothing. She'd gone numb somewhere around dawn. Samuel helped Thomas into the wagon, gentle with the boy's weakness. Thomas was excited despite everything. He'd never ridden in a wagon this nice, never seen a house like the Hale place. To him, this was an adventure. Better he think that. Better than the truth. Edwin was waiting on the porch. He looked worse than before, if that was possible. The 2 days since their meeting had cost him something, but he stood when they arrived, came down the steps under his own power. Mrs. Keaton, Mr. Hale. They looked at each other, the moment stretched. Behind them, Thomas coughed, a reminder of why they were both here. You've decided then, Edwin said. I have conditions. I'd expect nothing less. Thomas gets the surgery first, before anything else happens. Before any... She couldn't say it. Agreed. I want everything in writing, every promise you made. A lawyer I choose, not one you've already bought. Fine, I'll cover the cost. I keep my own name legally, Mara Keaton. The marriage doesn't erase who I was. Edwin considered that. Socially, you'll be Mrs. Hale. People need to believe this is legitimate, but legally, you can keep Keaton if that matters to you. It matters? Then done. He looked past her to Thomas. Is that the boy? That's my son. He looks like you. He looks like his father. Better looking than me, anyway. Edwin managed something close to a smile. Come inside. We have papers to sign. What? The documents were already prepared. A marriage contract, a will, a medical authorization, a dozen other things. The lawyer was there too, a thin man named Everett, who watched Mara like he thought she might bolt. Maybe she should have. But Thomas was sitting in the next room, drinking soup Margaret had made, looking better just from being in a house that had heat and food and help. That was enough to keep her in her chair. Everett went through everything. Edwin wasn't lying. It was all there, exactly as promised. The marriage terms, the inheritance rights, the provisions for Thomas. If she gave Edwin an heir, she'd get everything, the farm, the money, the authority to run it all. And if I don't? She asked. If I can't get pregnant? Everett glanced at Edwin. Then you get 30%, Edwin said. Enough to set you and your son up comfortably, but the farm goes to Thomas, my brother. That's the risk I'm taking. That you'll take my money for your son and then not deliver. And the risk I'm taking is that you'll die before the child is born, and your brother will find a way to break this will. He'll try. That's why the contract makes you my legal wife regardless. Kentucky law gives you protections as a widow, and why the will is structured to pass everything to you directly, not through a trust he could challenge. Everett's made it as tight as possible. As tight as possible isn't the same as certain. Nothing's certain, Mrs. Keaton, but this is as good as you'll get. She read through it all again, slower this time. The language was dense, full of legal words she half understood, but the core was clear enough. Marry Edwin, get pregnant, have the baby, inherit everything, sell herself for her son's life. Was that selling? Or was it just survival dressed up in contracts? Where do I sign? But they were married that afternoon. The minister came to the house, a young man who seemed uncomfortable with the whole affair but did his job anyway. Margaret and Samuel stood as witnesses. Thomas watched from a chair by the fire, too weak to stand for long. Mara wore the same dress she'd worn to meet Edwin. Edwin wore a clean suit that fit even worse than the last one. They stood in the parlor and the minister said the words and Mara repeated them in a voice that didn't sound like hers. I, Mara Keaton, take thee, Edwin Hale. The ring was simple gold, too big for her finger. Edwin's hand shook when he put it on her. Dying hands, doing one last thing before they quit entirely. I now pronounce you man and wife. No kiss? Edwin didn't try and Mara didn't offer. This wasn't that kind of marriage. Afterward, there was food. Margaret had prepared a meal that felt obscene in its abundance. Roast chicken, potatoes, bread still warm, pie. Thomas ate like he'd never seen food before. Mara pushed things around her plate and felt Edwin watching her from across the table. The surgery is scheduled for Monday, he said. Louisville. I've arranged a driver and contacted the specialist. You'll stay there with Thomas through the recovery, however long it takes. Margaret will pack what you need. You're not coming. I can't travel that far, not anymore. He said it without self-pity, just fact. But I've paid everything up front. They'll take good care of the boy. Thank you. The words felt strange, thanking him for saving her son's life when the payment was still coming due. Edwin nodded. After he's recovered, after you're settled, we'll deal with the rest then. No rush. Liar. There was all the rush in the world. 6 months, the doctors said, maybe less. Somewhere in that time, he needed her pregnant, needed the biological insurance that would protect everything he'd built. But for now, for tonight, there was just this. An awkward meal in a house too big, a sick child eating his fill, and two strangers bound together by need. Mara looked at her son, at the color coming back to his cheeks, the way he smiled at something Samuel said. Worth it, she thought. Whatever comes next, this part is worth it. Louisville was a different world. The hospital was clean, modern, full of nurses in white and doctors who spoke in confident tones. They took Thomas into surgery on Monday morning, and Mara spent 6 hours in a waiting room with magazines she couldn't focus on and coffee she couldn't drink. When the surgeon finally came out, he was smiling. The procedure went very well. We removed the damaged tissue and the infection is cleared. With proper care and medication, your son should make a full recovery. Mara cried for the first time since Robert died. She stayed with Thomas for 2 weeks while he healed. The hospital room was nicer than her cabin, clean sheets every day, food brought on trays, windows that looked out on the city. Thomas thought it was amazing. He'd never been anywhere bigger than Barton County. Can we stay here? He asked one night. This is a hospital, sweetheart. People don't stay in hospitals. I mean in Louisville, it's so big. There's so much. We have a home to go back to. Do we? He looked at her with those two smart eyes. You married him. That means his house is our house now, right? Technically, yes. Legally, she was Mrs. Edwin Hale, and the Hale house was hers as much as his. But it didn't feel that way. It felt like she was a guest in someone else's life, playing a role she didn't understand yet. I guess it is. Is he mean, Mr. Hale? No, he's not mean. Then why do you look sad when you talk about him? Because it's not real, she wanted to say. Because I sold myself to save you, and I'd do it again, but that doesn't make it feel any less like selling. But she couldn't say that to a 9-year-old, so she just kissed his forehead and told him to rest. They returned to the Hale farm on a Tuesday. Edwin was waiting on the porch, thinner than before but standing. He watched as Samuel helped Thomas down from the wagon, the boy moving slow but moving under his own power. Better? Edwin asked. Much better, Mara said. The doctors say he'll be fine with rest and medication. Good. Edwin's eyes were on Thomas, studying him. You look like a fighter, boy. Thomas straightened up despite his weakness. Yes, sir. Good. We need fighters around here. He glanced at Mara. Your room's ready. Margaret set you up in the east wing, 2 bedrooms connected. Figured the boy would want his own space. That's thoughtful. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Margaret. I just told her to handle it. He turned to go inside, stopped. I'm glad he's all right, Mrs. Keaton. Truly. For the first time, she believed he meant it. Mutt. The routine settled in strange. Mara woke in a bedroom twice the size of her old cabin, in a bed that was too soft, in a house that creaked with emptiness. Thomas's room was next door. She could hear him breathing through the wall, steady now, healthy. That sound alone was worth everything. Breakfast was in the dining room, a formal affair that felt ridiculous. Edwin sat at the head of the table, barely touching his food. Thomas ate enough for both of them, gaining weight daily. Mara sat between them and felt like a bridge connecting 2 foreign countries. What happens here? She asked one morning. On the farm. What needs doing? Edwin looked up from his coffee. You want to work? I want to understand what I'm inheriting. Fair point, his expression said. Come with me then. He took her through the property, moving slow but thorough. The tobacco fields, acres of rich bottomland. The corn plots. The timber sections. The livestock pens. The workers' cabins, small but solid, housing the families who'd been here for generations. Some were freedmen who'd stayed on after the war. Others were white families just as poor. All of them depended on this place. This isn't just a farm, Edwin said, stopping to catch his breath at the top of a rise. It's a community. 30 people work this land directly. Another 20 depend on it indirectly. You let this fail, and all of them suffer. Mara looked out at the fields, the distant figures working them. That's a lot of responsibility. That's what you signed up for. I signed up to give you an heir. Same thing. He coughed, hard. The heir inherits the responsibility. You manage that heir, which means you need to understand what you're managing. Over the following weeks, Edwin walked her through everything, the crop rotations, the financial ledgers, the water rights and timber contracts, the relationships with merchants and buyers, the history of every worker, their families, their needs. It was overwhelming. It was also fascinating. Mara had run her small farm for years, but this was different. This was complex, intricate, a machine with 100 moving parts that all had to work together. And Edwin knew every gear, every lever. You're good at this, she said one afternoon in his office, watching him work through accounts. Had to be. My father died when I was 25. Sink or swim. Did you ever want anything else? He glanced up. Like what? I don't know. Something that wasn't this. Edwin was quiet for a moment. When I was young, I thought about leaving, seeing the world, trying something different. But then my father got sick, and then he died. And there was this. He gestured to the papers. You can't leave something like this behind. Too many people depending on it. That sounds lonely. It is what it is. He went back to the ledger. You'll figure that out soon enough. Spring turned towards summer. Thomas grew stronger daily, running around the farm with an energy that made Mara's heart hurt with relief. He made friends with Samuel's grandson, the 2 boys turning the property into their kingdom. Edwin grew weaker. It happened in increments. One day he could walk the fields. The next, he needed to rest halfway. Then he couldn't walk them at all, just sat on the porch and directed things from there. The cough got worse, longer, wetter. Some mornings he didn't come down until noon. Mara tried not to watch it happen, but it was impossible to miss. You should be in bed, she told him one afternoon when he insisted on reviewing contracts despite barely being able to sit up. I'll be in bed permanently soon enough. That's not funny. Wasn't trying to be funny. He signed a document, his handwriting shakier than before. Just honest. The doctor can't do anything except charge me money to tell me what I already know. He set the pen down. I'm dying, Mrs. Keaton, has been the plan all along. The only question is whether I accomplish what I need to before it happens. The weight of that sat between them. They hadn't talked about it, the other part of their agreement. The consummation, the pregnancy, the heir. Thomas's surgery had bought them time, but that time was running out. I know what you're thinking, Edwin said. You don't. I'm thinking it too. He looked at her directly. I've been a gentleman about this because you needed time to adjust, because your son needed to heal, because forcing the issue would make me the villain, and I'm practical enough to know that wouldn't serve either of us. But we're running out of time. Mara's throat went tight. I know. I don't enjoy this situation any more than you do. I'm not a monster, but I need to know if you're going to uphold your end. I gave my word. Words are easy. Action is harder. She stood up, moved to the window. Outside, Thomas was playing with Samuel's grandson, their laughter carrying on the wind. Alive, healthy, running and jumping and being a child again. That was the trade. That was what she'd bought with this marriage. Tonight, she said, not looking at Edwin, after Thomas is asleep. Behind her, she heard Edwin's breath catch. Surprise, maybe, or relief. You're sure? No. She turned around. But I'm doing it anyway. That was the deal. Edwin nodded slowly. All right then, tonight. Dad. Mara put Thomas to bed at 8, reading him a story he was probably too old for but still enjoyed. He was happy here. The food, the space, the fact that he wasn't dying anymore. He'd adjusted better than she had. Is this our home now? He asked when she closed the book. Yes. Forever? Nothing was forever, but she said, yes. Good. I like it here. Mr. Hale is nice. He is. Are you happy, Mama? The question caught her off guard. Why do you ask? You seem sad sometimes, like you're worried. She kissed his forehead. I'm happy you're better. That's what matters. After he fell asleep, she sat in her room and tried not to think, tried not to calculate what was about to happen, what it meant, what it made her. A knock on the door at 9. Margaret's voice. Ma'am, Mr. Hale is ready. Ready. Like this was a business meeting. Maybe it was. Mara stood, smoothed her nightdress, and walked down the hall to Edwin's room. He was sitting on the bed, looking worse than she'd ever seen him. The lamplight made the hollows in his face deeper, the shadows longer. He looked like a man already halfway to the grave. Mrs. Keaton. Mara. If they were doing this, he could at least use her name. Mara, then. He gestured awkwardly. I'm not good at this kind of thing. Neither am I. I know this isn't what you wanted. It's what I agreed to. They looked at each other across the space of the room, two people trapped by circumstances neither of them could control, doing what they had to do to survive. For what it's worth, Edwin said quietly, I wish it were different. I wish I'd met you under other circumstances. I wish I had time to court you properly, to let this be real instead of this. Something in Mara's chest cracked a little. But you don't have time. No. She moved closer, sat on the bed beside him. Up close, she could hear how hard each breath came, how much it cost him just to stay upright. This doesn't have to be terrible, she said, though she had no idea if that was true. Edwin managed a weak smile. You're kinder than I deserve. I'm practical, same as you. He reached for her hand and she let him take it. His skin was hot, fever probably. Everything about him burned too bright, too fast, consuming itself. I'll try to make this as respectful as possible, he said. Mara almost laughed. Respectful. As if there was a respectful way to honor a contract that traded her body for her son's life. But she didn't laugh. She just nodded and let it happen. Afterward, Edwin fell asleep almost immediately, his body too exhausted for anything else. Mara lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what she'd done settle over her like a blanket made of lead. It hadn't been terrible. Edwin had been gentle, mechanical, efficient, like everything else he did. No pleasure in it, but no cruelty either. Just two people fulfilling the terms of an agreement. But lying there in the dark, in a stranger's bed, in a life she'd never wanted, Mara felt something break inside her. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet crack, like ice forming on a pond. She'd saved her son, but what had she done to herself? The question sat in her chest like a stone as Edwin's labored breathing filled the room and the night stretched on forever. The pregnancy took 3 months to confirm. 3 months of Edwin growing weaker while Mara learned to run a farm that wasn't hers, but somehow was. 3 months of Thomas settling into a life he'd never imagined, healthy and happy and blissfully unaware of what his mother had traded for it. 3 months of Mara waking up every morning, wondering who she'd become. Dr. Morehouse came to the house in late August. He examined her in the upstairs bedroom while Margaret waited outside the door, proper and silent. Edwin was downstairs in his office, too sick to climb stairs anymore, but still insisting on reviewing the harvest projections. "Well," Morehouse said, packing his instruments away. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hale. You're with child." Mrs. Hale. She still wasn't used to that name, even though she'd been signing it on documents for months now. "You're certain?" "Quite certain. I'd estimate you're about 10 weeks along. Everything appears normal." He closed his bag, looked at her with something that might have been sympathy or might have been judgment. Hard to tell with Morehouse. "Does your husband know?" "Not yet." "You should tell him soon. Given his condition, he'll want to prepare." Prepare to die, he meant. Prepare to check the last item off his list before his body quit on him entirely. After Morehouse left, Mara sat on the bed and put her hand on her stomach. Nothing showed yet. No movement, no sign. Just the knowledge that something had taken root, was growing, would eventually become a person who'd inherit all of this whether they wanted to or not. A person conceived from a transaction. She should have felt something. Joy, fear, anything. Instead, there was just numbness and the weight of inevitability. Downstairs, she found Edwin exactly where she'd left him, bent over papers he could barely focus on anymore. His hand shook when he wrote. The ink blotted. "We need to talk," she said. He looked up, read her face, understood immediately. "You're pregnant." "Yes." Edwin set down his pen carefully, like it was made of glass. For a long moment, he just breathed, that wet, rattling sound that never went away anymore. Then something in his expression shifted. Not quite relief, not quite satisfaction. Something closer to peace. "Good," he said quietly. "That's good." "Is it?" "It means this wasn't for nothing." He gestured at the papers, at the room, at everything. "It means there's a chance." Mara sat down across from him. The office smelled like tobacco and old leather and the camphor rub Margaret used on Edwin's chest every night to help him breathe. "You got what you wanted." "We both got what we wanted. Your son is alive. My farm has an heir." "That's not the same thing." "No," Edwin admitted, "but it's what we have." They sat in silence. Outside, Thomas's laughter carried through the window. Him and Samuel's grandson playing some game that involved a lot of running. The sound made Mara's chest tight. "I need to tell you something," Edwin said, "before I run out of time to say it." "You don't have to—" "I do." He shifted in his chair, winced. Everything hurt him now. "I know what you think of me, what you think of this arrangement, and you're not wrong. I bought myself an heir because I was desperate and running out of options. That's the truth of it." "Then why tell me this?" "Because you need to know that I see what this cost you. Your pride, your dignity, maybe your peace of mind. I see it, and I'm sorry for it, even if I'd make the same choice again." He met her eyes. "You're a good woman, Mara Keaton, better than I deserved, and I'm going to do everything I can with whatever time I have left to make sure you and your children are protected after I'm gone." Something in Mara's throat went tight. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't be decent about this now. It's easier when you're just the man who bought me." Edwin's laugh was bitter, cut short by coughing. "Can't help it. Dying makes a man honest." "Then be honest about this. Do you regret it? Any of it?" He considered the question seriously. "No. I needed an heir, and I got one, but I regret that you had to be the price. If there'd been another way, there wasn't." "I know." He looked old suddenly. Older than dying should make a man. Doesn't mean I can't wish otherwise. Mara stood up before the conversation could get any heavier. I'll tell Thomas about the baby tonight. He should hear it from me. Will he be happy? I don't know. Probably. He's 9. Everything's an adventure when you're 9. Must be nice. After she left, Mara stood in the hallway and put her hand on her stomach again. Inside her was Edwin Hale's child, the biological lock on an inheritance, the future of a farm she was still learning to understand. Inside her was also just a baby, a person who hadn't asked for any of this. She wondered if they'd forgive her someday for how they came into the world. That night at dinner, with Thomas devouring roast chicken like he hadn't eaten in days, and Edwin picking at his food across the table, Mara cleared her throat. I have news, she said. Thomas looked up. Good news? I think so. You're going to have a brother or sister. Thomas's eyes went wide. Really? Really? He processed this, fork halfway to his mouth. Then he grinned, that pure, uncomplicated joy that children managed when adults had forgotten how. That's amazing. When? Spring, probably. March or April. Can I help with the baby? I'll be the best big brother ever. Across the table, Edwin watched them with an expression Mara couldn't quite read. Something soft in it. Something that looked almost like longing. I'm sure you will be, she said to Thomas. Later, after Thomas had gone to bed, still chattering about names and whether the baby would like horses, Edwin found Mara in the sitting room. Thank you, he said. For what? For telling him like that. Like it's a good thing. It is a good thing. Children are always good things, even when they come from... She trailed off. From arrangements like ours? Yeah. Edwin lowered himself into a chair with the careful movements of someone whose body barely cooperated anymore. I won't be here to see them grow up. You know that. I know. But you will. You'll be here for all of it. The first words, the first steps, all of it. And you'll have this farm to give them. This life. That has to count for something. Mara looked at him, this dying man who'd rearranged her entire existence to save his own legacy, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not even affection, but something closer to understanding. It counts, she said quietly. It's not what I would have chosen, but it counts. That's all I can ask for. The autumn came hard that year. Edwin deteriorated faster than anyone expected. By September, he couldn't leave his bed. By October, he couldn't sit up without help. Margaret and Mara took turns tending to him, administering morphine when the pain got too bad, reading to him when he was alert enough to listen. But even dying, Edwin insisted on teaching Mara everything. The tobacco buyers will try to cheat you, he said one afternoon, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't let them. Know the market price before they arrive, and don't settle for less than fair value. I'll remember. And the timber rights. That contract with Morrison expires in 2 years. Renegotiate before then, or he'll assume he can just renew at the same rate. Edwin, you should rest. I'll rest when I'm dead. A weak smile. Which is soon enough. Let me do this while I can. So she let him. Let him walk her through every detail of running the farm, every relationship with every merchant and buyer, every trick and strategy he'd learned in 30 years. She took notes, asked questions, absorbed it all, like her life depended on it. Because it did. Thomas visited sometimes, bringing drawings he'd made or stories about his adventures with Samuel's grandson. Edwin would listen, ask questions, treat the boy with a gentleness that surprised Mara. He never pretended to be Thomas's father. That would have been a lie too far. But he was kind, and kindness was enough. You're good with him, Mara said one evening after Thomas had left. He's an easy kid to be good with. He is, but you didn't have to be. That wasn't part of the arrangement. Edwin was quiet for a moment. The arrangement was business. This is just being decent. They're not the same thing. No, Mara agreed. They're not. In November, Edwin's brother Thomas showed up unannounced. Mara was in the barn checking on a mare about to foal when Samuel came running. Mrs. Hale, you better come quick. There's trouble at the house. She found Thomas Hale, the other Thomas, the wastrel, standing in the parlor like he owned it. He was maybe 45, red-faced, well-dressed in a way that couldn't quite hide the dissolution underneath. He looked like Edwin would have looked if Edwin had spent his life drinking instead of building. "Who are you?" he demanded when Mara walked in. "I'm Mara Hale, Edwin's wife." Thomas Hale laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Wife? Since when does Edwin have a wife?" "Since June. We married in June." "Convenient." His eyes raked over her, calculating. "Very convenient. My brother's dying, and suddenly he's got a wife young enough to inherit everything. How much did that cost him?" Mara felt her jaw tighten. "I think you should leave. I think you're a con artist who saw an opportunity." Thomas moved closer, whiskey on his breath even though it wasn't yet noon. "I know how this works. Pretty widow, sick child, desperate situation. Edwin always was soft for a sob story." "Mr. Hale." "Where is he? I want to talk to my brother." "He's resting. He's not well enough for visitors." "I'm not a visitor. I'm family," which is more than you can say, no matter what papers you tricked him into signing. Before Mara could respond, Edwin's voice cut through the room. "Get out of my house, Thomas." He stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame, looking like death itself had taken human form just to deliver one last message. Margaret hovered behind him, wringing her hands. Thomas Hale turned. "Edwin, you look terrible. You look drunk. Nothing changes." Edwin's breathing was labored, every word an effort. "What do you want?" "To make sure you haven't lost your mind completely." "A wife? Really? Some woman you just met?" "My wife. My business, not yours." "It becomes my business when you're leaving everything to a stranger instead of family." Edwin's laugh was bitter. "You're not family, Thomas. You're a liability. The only reason you're here is because you heard I'm dying and you want to make sure your inheritance is secure." "Damn right I do. That farm should be mine. Would be mine if you hadn't—" "If I hadn't what? Worked for 30 years while you pissed away every dollar father left you? If I hadn't built something worth inheriting while you gambled and drank and failed at everything you touched?" Edwin's voice was getting stronger, fueled by anger. "You don't deserve this farm, and you're not getting it." "We'll see about that." Thomas's face was purple now. "You can't just cut out blood for some woman you bought off the street." "Watch me. I'll fight this. I'll fight the will, the marriage, all of it. No court will uphold this sham." Edwin pushed off the doorframe, took 2 steps forward, and nearly collapsed. Mara caught him, supported his weight. He was burning up with fever, shaking with effort. "You can fight all you want," Edwin said. "You'll lose. The marriage is legal. The will is ironclad. Everett made sure of that. And even if you somehow break it, you won't get the farm. I'll burn it to the ground before I let you have it." "You're insane." "I'm dying. There's a difference." Edwin coughed, a terrible sound. "Now get out, and don't come back. You're not welcome here. Not now, not at my funeral, not ever." Thomas Hale stared at his brother, at Mara supporting him, at the scene that made clear he'd already lost. Then he spat on the floor and walked out. The door slammed. Edwin sagged in Mara's arms. "Let's get you back to bed," she said quietly. "That went well," Edwin muttered as she helped him up the stairs. "You shouldn't have gotten up." "Had to. Couldn't let him talk to you like that." "I can handle Thomas Hale." "I know, but you shouldn't have to. He was breathing too hard, his skin too hot. He'll make trouble, Mara, even after I'm gone. You need to be ready for that." "I will be." Back in bed, Edwin looked smaller than ever, like the confrontation had used up his last reserves. Margaret brought laudanum, and he took it without complaint. "I meant what I said," he told Mara before the drug took him under, about burning it down. "I'd rather destroy everything than let him have it." "I know. You're stronger than he is, smarter. When the time comes, don't back down." "I won't." He closed his eyes. "Good woman. I'm glad it was you." Mara sat with him until he fell asleep, then went to find Thomas, her Thomas, not the other one, and held him tight. "Who was that man?" her son asked. "No one who matters. He seemed mean." "He was, but he's gone now." Mr. Hale looked really sick. "He is sick, sweetheart." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Is he going to die soon?" Mara couldn't lie to him. Yes. That's sad. It is. Will we have to leave after? She pulled back, looked at him. No, this is our home now. No one can take that away from us. I promise. Thomas nodded, trusting her completely. That trust was heavy, but Mara was getting used to carrying heavy things. December brought snow and a new crisis. Edwin woke up one morning unable to speak. The stroke had been mild, the doctor said, but it had taken his voice. He could move his left hand enough to write, though the words came out shaky and hard to read. Mara learned to interpret his scrawls. More morphine. Check the tobacco stores. Thomas, my brother, lawyer. That last one she understood. Edwin wanted to make sure everything was secure before the end. She sent for Everett, who came out with updated documents for Edwin to sign. More safeguards, more protections, more walls against Thomas Hale's inevitable challenge. Edwin signed everything with his left hand, each signature a fight against his failing body. Mara's pregnancy was showing now, a small swell that made her feel foreign to herself. She was carrying Edwin's child, would give birth to a person who'd never know their father, who'd inherit a farm built on desperate bargains and cold practicality. Sometimes at night, she felt the baby move, tiny flutters like wings. Those moments, alone in her room, were the only time she let herself feel anything about it. One afternoon in late December, with snow falling outside and Edwin drifting in and out of consciousness, Mara sat by his bed and read to him from the farm ledgers. Not because he needed to hear them, he knew the numbers better than she did, but because it seemed to comfort him, knowing the work would continue. His left hand moved on the blanket. She gave him the pencil and paper. He wrote slowly. Thank you. For what? Everything. Mara's throat went tight. You paid me for everything. He shook his head, wrote again. More than money. You gave dignity to this. Could have been just business. You made it something better. I don't know about better. I do. His hand trembled as he wrote. You're a good person, Mara. Farm lucky to have you. Baby lucky to have you. Stop, you're not dying today. A weak smile crossed his face. He wrote, Soon, though. Not today. Soon. He was right. Mara could see it in the gray tinge to his skin, the way each breath came harder than the last. Edwin Hale was running out of time, and no amount of money or planning could buy him more. Rest, she said. I'll be here. He closed his eyes, and Mara sat with him as the snow fell and the afternoon faded, and somewhere inside her, his child grew toward a spring he'd never see. Thomas, her Thomas, came in quietly, stood beside her. Is he sleeping? Yes. Can I stay? Of course. They sat together, mother and son, watching a dying man breathe. It should have been sad, and it was, but it was also something else, a kind of vigil, a bearing witness. I'm glad we came here, Thomas said suddenly. Mara looked at him. You are? Yeah, I know it's weird, and I know things are complicated, but I'm alive because of him. That matters. It does. And you're happier than you were. I can tell. Am I? You don't cry at night anymore. In the old cabin, I could hear you sometimes. Here, you don't. Mara hadn't known he'd heard that. She put her arm around him. There's a lot less to cry about now. Because of Mr. Hale. Because of a lot of things. But yes, partly because of him. They sat in silence. Edwin's breathing filled the room, steady for now, inevitable in its decline. I'm scared of him dying, Thomas admitted. Me too. But we'll be okay, right? After? Mara thought about Thomas Hale's threats, the legal battles ahead, the responsibility of running a farm she barely understood. She thought about the baby growing inside her, the life she'd built from desperation, the strange shape of what her existence had become. Yes, she said, we'll be okay. She had to believe that. Had to believe this bargain had been worth it, that Edwin's careful planning would hold, that she was strong enough to protect what they'd built. Had to believe she could become the woman this farm needed her to be. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, a dying man slept, and a woman kept watch, and a boy sat beside his mother, and somewhere in the distance spring waited with all its promises and demands. Edwin Hale died on January 3rd, 1884. He went quietly in the night, no drama, no last words. Margaret found him in the morning, already cold, his face peaceful for the first time in months. Mara stood in the doorway of his bedroom and felt nothing. That scared her more than grief would have. This man had changed her entire life, given her security, died giving her his legacy, and she felt nothing. Maybe the numbness would crack later. Maybe it wouldn't. Either way, there was work to do. The funeral was small. The minister said words about a man he barely knew. The workers came, stood respectfully, went back to their lives. Thomas Hale, the brother, showed up drunk, made a scene, had to be removed. No one was surprised. They buried Edwin on the hill overlooking the farm he'd built. The ground was frozen, made the gravediggers work for it. Mara stood with Thomas beside her, her hand on her swelling stomach, and watched them lower a man she'd married but never loved into Kentucky soil. "Goodbye," she said quietly. It wasn't enough, but it was all she had. That night, alone in the big house that was hers now, Mara went through Edwin's papers. The will was exactly as promised, everything to her and the unborn child, nothing to his brother. The farm, the money, the authority, all of it legal and binding. But Thomas Hale wouldn't accept that. Edwin had been right about that too. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, the lawyer's letter arrived. Thomas Hale was contesting the will, challenging the marriage, demanding the farm that should have been his by blood. Mara read it twice, then set it aside and went to check on the tobacco stores like Edwin had taught her. Let Thomas challenge, let him fight. She had work to do. The farm wasn't going to run itself, and she'd be damned if she'd let Edwin sacrifice mean nothing just because his brother was a greedy drunk. She'd made a bargain. She'd kept her end. Now it was time to prove she deserved what it had bought her. The spring planning started 3 weeks after Edwin's funeral, and Mara learned fast that grief was a luxury farmers couldn't afford. She stood in the field at dawn with Samuel and the crew bosses, her pregnant belly straining against her coat, discussing seed distribution and soil rotation like she'd been doing it her whole life instead of 6 months. The men watched her with careful eyes, testing, waiting to see if she'd crumble under the weight Edwin had left her. She didn't crumble. "The north field needs another week before we plant," she said, pointing to the section that still held too much water from the snowmelt. "Ground's too soft. We'll lose half the seed to rot if we go in now." Samuel nodded. "That's what Mr. Hale would have said." "Then Mr. Hale taught me right." She turned to the other men. "South field first, then east, then north when it dries. Same rotation as last year. Questions?" No one had questions. Or if they did, they kept them to themselves. Back at the house, Margaret had breakfast waiting, and news that made Mara's stomach drop. "Mr. Thomas Hale was here this morning," Margaret said, her face tight with disapproval. "Before you were up, I told him you were out working, and he said he'd be back." "What did he want?" "Didn't say, but he was looking at the house like he was counting the silver." Mara sat down heavily, her back aching from standing in the cold. The baby had been active all morning, pressing against her ribs like it was trying to kick its way out early. "When did he say he'd return?" "This afternoon. Said you'd want to hear his offer." "His offer?" Mara laughed, bitter. "Let me guess. He'll drop the lawsuit if I give him half the farm." Margaret's silence confirmed it. "Well, he can go straight to hell with his offer." "Yes, ma'am." Margaret set a plate down, eggs and bacon and fresh bread. "But he's got lawyers now, good ones from what I hear. Town's talking about it." "Let them talk." But the worry sat in Mara's chest while she ate, heavy as the child she carried. Thomas Hale had money from somewhere, probably borrowed against the inheritance he thought he'd win. Good lawyers cost plenty, and they knew tricks. Edwin had warned her about this, had built walls in the will, but walls could be climbed if you were desperate enough. Thomas showed up at 2, dressed like he was going to church, smelling like bay rum and whiskey. Mara met him in the parlor, standing because sitting made her feel vulnerable, and she refused to give him that. "Mrs. Hale." He said it like the name was a joke. "You're looking well. Pregnancy suits you. Say what you came to say and leave." "Direct." "I appreciate that." He settled into Edwin's chair without being invited, crossed his legs like he owned the place. I've been thinking about our situation. There is no situation. Edwin left everything to me. The will is legal. The will is questionable. My lawyers have found several irregularities. Your lawyers are lying to you for money. Thomas smiled. Maybe. Or maybe they found legitimate grounds to challenge a marriage that happened suspiciously fast between a dying man and a desperate widow. Courts don't look kindly on deathbed marriages, especially when there's this much money involved. Mara's hands went to her stomach, protective. The marriage was legal. We have witnesses, documents, everything. You have a piece of paper and a story that sounds like a bad novel. Rich dying man, poor widow, sick child, convenient pregnancy. He leaned forward. I'm not saying you schemed it. Maybe Edwin did the scheming. But either way, it stinks, and a judge will smell it too. Get to your point. My point is this. I don't want a legal battle. It's expensive, messy, takes years. Bad for everyone. He spread his hands, reasonable. So here's my offer. You give me half the farm and half the money. Keep the house. Keep enough to live on comfortably. In exchange, I drop the lawsuit, acknowledge your marriage, let you raise that baby in peace. Half. It's generous, considering I could take it all. Mara stared at him, this man who'd never worked a day in his life, never built anything, never sacrificed anything, demanding half of what Edwin had died protecting. The anger that rose in her was clean and sharp. No. Think about it before you I said no. This farm is mine. Edwin left it to me because he knew you'd destroy it. I'm not giving you half so you can drink and gamble it away while the families here starve. Thomas's face darkened. You're making a mistake. The only mistake would be trusting you. Mara moved to the door, held it open. Get out of my house. This isn't over. You're right about that. When your lawsuit fails, and it will fail, don't come crawling back asking for handouts. The answer will still be no. He stood slowly, all pretense of friendliness gone. You think you're so smart, don't you? Think you can just step into Edwin's shoes and play lady of the manor, but you're still just a farm wife who got lucky. And luck runs out. So does patience leave. After he was gone, Mara closed the door and leaned against it, shaking. The baby kicked hard, like it was angry too, and she put both hands on her stomach and breathed through the fear. She'd just gambled everything. If Thomas's lawyers were better than she thought, if they found some crack in Edwin's planning, she could lose it all. The farm, the security, everything she'd traded herself for. But backing down would have been worse. Edwin had trusted her to protect this place. She'd promised him, and maybe she'd never loved him. Maybe their marriage had been nothing but cold practicality. But she owed him this much. She owed herself this much too. Margaret found her there 10 minutes later, still leaning against the door. You all right, ma'am? No, but I'll manage. Mara pushed off the door, straightened up. I need you to send word to Everett. Tell him Thomas Hale was here making threats. Tell him we need to prepare for whatever's coming. Yes, ma'am. And Margaret, thank you. For everything. For staying. For believing in this. Margaret's stern face softened slightly. Mr. Edwin was a good man under all that hardness. He made the right choice with you. Anyone with eyes can see that. After Margaret left, Mara went to Edwin's office and sat at his desk and pulled out the ledgers. There was comfort in numbers, and the concrete reality of crop yields and market prices. The farm had made a profit last year, not huge, but solid. If she could repeat that, prove she could run this place competently, it would strengthen her case. If she failed, if the crops failed, if the workers lost faith in her leadership, Thomas's lawyers would use it as evidence she was incompetent. That Edwin had been out of his mind to leave everything to her. No pressure. Thomas, knocked on the open door. Mama, you okay? Come in, sweetheart. He sat in the chair across from her, all elbows and knees, growing fast on regular food and safety. He'd be 10 soon, would hit adolescence before she knew it. The thought made her chest ache. I saw that man leaving, Thomas said. The mean one from before. He came to make an offer. What kind of offer? Mara debated lying, decided against it. He wants me to give him half the farm so he'll stop trying to take all of it. Thomas's eyes went wide. You said no, right? I said no. Good. He nodded firmly. This is our home. Mr. Hale left it to us. That other Thomas can't have it. It might not be that simple, honey. Why not? You're the boss now. You married Mr. Hale, and he left everything to you. That's how it works. If only adult complications were so easy to navigate. Sometimes people fight about things in court. Sometimes they win even when they shouldn't. Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he said, "You're scared." "A little." "Don't be. You're the strongest person I know. You saved my life. You can do anything." The faith in his voice was absolute, terrifying. Mar came around the desk and hugged him, this boy she'd sold herself to save, who believed in her completely. "I love you," she said. "I love you too, and so does the baby, probably." She laughed despite everything. "Probably. When's it coming anyway?" "April, maybe early May. That's soon." "I know. Are you scared about that too?" More than she'd admit. She'd given birth once before, knew what it cost, how dangerous it could be. She'd be doing it alone this time, without Robert holding her hand, without Edwin waiting anxiously outside. Just her and a baby neither of them had chosen. "A little," she said, "but I'll manage. I always do." The lawsuit moved forward like a slow-rolling storm. Papers arrived weekly, formal and threatening. Depositions were scheduled. Witnesses were called. People who'd known Edwin, who could testify about his state of mind before he died. Thomas Hale's lawyers were thorough. Mara had to give them that. They dug into everything. Everett fought back just as hard. He brought in medical records showing Edwin had been mentally sound until the stroke. He produced the signed contract between Mara and Edwin, the one spelling out their arrangement with brutal clarity. He had Margaret and Samuel testify that the marriage had been legitimate, witnessed, consummated. Mara sat through depositions 8 months pregnant and answered questions designed to humiliate her. "Mrs. Keaton, excuse me, Mrs. Hale, when exactly did you first meet the deceased?" "June 5th. "And you were married on?" "June 7th. 2 days later, quite a whirlwind romance," Everett cut in. "Is there a question, counselor?" The lawyer, a thin man named Pritchard, who smiled like a snake, shuffled his papers. "I'm merely establishing timeline. Mrs. Hale, is it true your son was seriously ill at the time of this meeting?" "Yes." "Requiring expensive medical treatment you couldn't afford?" "Yes." "And Mr. Edwin Hale offered to pay for this treatment in exchange for marriage?" Mara met his eyes. "Mr. Hale and I entered into a mutually beneficial arrangement. He needed an heir. I needed resources. We were both adults capable of making our own decisions." "Some might call that prostitution." Everett stood up. "That's out of line." "Withdrawn." Pritchard didn't look sorry. "Mrs. Hale, did you love Edwin Hale when you married him?" The question sat heavy in the air. Mara could lie. Should lie, probably. But something in her rebelled against giving them that. "No," she said. "I didn't love him. I respected him. I honored our agreement. But I didn't love him." "And yet you expect us to believe this was a legitimate marriage?" "I expect you to believe what the law says, that 2 consenting adults entered into a legal marriage contract, fulfilled their obligations to each other, and created a valid will. My feelings are irrelevant." Pritchard smiled. "We'll see what the judge thinks about that." After the deposition, Everett walked Mara to the wagon. "You did well in there." "I told the truth, not sure that was smart." "It was honest. Judges appreciate honest." He helped her up, careful of her belly. "But I won't lie to you, Mara. This is going to be close. Pritchard's building a case that Edwin was coerced or mentally incompetent. If he can convince the judge—" "He wasn't coerced. I was the one who had no choice." "I know, but that's not how they're spinning it." Everett sighed. "Just keep running the farm well. Show you're competent, that Edwin made the right choice. That's our best defense." Competent. As if growing a human being while learning to manage 300 acres and 30 workers wasn't evidence enough. But Mara went back to the farm and worked harder. She was in the fields every morning, reviewing progress, making decisions, proving she belonged. The workers watched her pregnant belly with concern, but she ignored it. There'd be time to rest after the baby came. Maybe. The baby came on a Tuesday in April, 3 weeks early, and angry about it. Mara woke at midnight to pain that doubled her over. She made it to the hall before her water broke, made it to Margaret's room before the next contraction hit. "Get the doctor," she gasped. Margaret took one look and started shouting orders. "Samuel, ride for Dr. Morehouse. Tell him it's time. Mary, boil water and bring clean sheets." They got Mara to bed just as another contraction ripped through her. She'd forgotten this part. How labor erased everything else, narrowed the world down to pain and breathing and the biological imperative to get the child out. Dr. Morehouse arrived an hour later. By then Mara was sweating through her nightgown, gripping the bedpost, making sounds she'd be embarrassed about later. "How far apart?" Morehouse asked Margaret. 5 minutes. "Getting closer." "All right, Mrs. Hale, let's see where we are." The examination was brief and not gentle. Morehouse straightened up, frowning. "The baby's turned wrong. Breech." Mara's blood went cold. "Can you fix it?" "I can try, but I need you to not push, no matter how much you want to. Can you do that?" She nodded, teeth gritted. The next contraction came and her body screamed to push, and she fought it with everything she had. Morehouse worked fast, his hands inside her, trying to turn a baby that didn't want to turn. Mara heard herself screaming and didn't care. Pain was irrelevant. Getting the baby out alive was all that mattered. "There," Morehouse said finally. "I've got it. Next contraction, you push." Mara pushed. The birth took 3 more hours. 3 hours of pushing and bleeding and praying to nothing in particular that both she and the child would survive this. Margaret held her hand. Morehouse gave orders. And somewhere in the pre-dawn darkness, Mara felt something tear inside her and screamed and pushed one final time. The baby's cry was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. "It's a girl," Morehouse said, holding up a tiny, furious creature covered in blood and vernix. "Small, but her lungs work fine." They cleaned the baby and wrapped her and put her in Mara's arms. She was so small, so impossibly fragile, with Edwin's dark hair and a face like a wrinkled apple. Her eyes opened, unfocused, searching, and found Mara's. "Hello," Mara whispered. The baby made a sound, not quite a cry, more like a question. "I know," Mara said. "I don't know what we're doing either." Margaret was crying quietly in the corner. Morehouse was cleaning up, packing his instruments, looking exhausted. Outside, dawn was breaking over the farm Edwin had died protecting. The farm this tiny creature now owned half of. "What will you name her?" Margaret asked. Mara hadn't thought about it. Should have, probably, but she'd been so focused on surviving the pregnancy and the lawsuit and everything else that names had seemed irrelevant. "Clara," she said, the name coming from nowhere. "Her name is Clara." Clara Hale. Edwin's daughter, Mara's child. The biological seal on a bargain made in desperation. The baby, Clara, yawned and closed her eyes and fell asleep like she hadn't just been born into the middle of a legal battle for her inheritance. Mara looked at her and felt something crack open in her chest. Not love, not yet, but something close. Something that felt like the beginning of it. "You're going to have to be strong," she told the sleeping infant. "This world doesn't make it easy for us. But we're going to be okay. I promise." The promises kept piling up. She'd promised Thomas he wouldn't die. She'd promised Edwin she'd protect his farm. Now she was promising Clara a future that wasn't guaranteed. But sitting there with her newborn daughter in her arms, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not quite hope, not quite confidence, but something harder, sharper. Determination. Let Thomas Hale and his lawyers come. Let them question and depose and scheme. She had 2 children now who depended on her. She had a farm to run and a legacy to protect and absolutely no room left for doubt. She'd made her choice that day in Edwin's parlor. Now she'd live with it, fight for it, prove it was worth every compromise. Morehouse left after giving instructions about recovery. Margaret took Clara so Mara could rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Her body ached, her breasts were already swelling with milk, and somewhere in her abdomen she could feel the tear that would take weeks to heal. But none of that mattered as much as the knowledge that she'd done it. Survived the pregnancy, delivered Edwin's heir, fulfilled the last piece of their bargain. Now came the hard part. The lawsuit went to court 6 weeks after Clara's birth. Mara sat in the courtroom with Clara in her arms, still bleeding from childbirth, watching Thomas Hale's lawyers try to destroy everything. They called witnesses who testified that Edwin had been desperate, mentally compromised, manipulated by a scheming woman who saw opportunity in a dying man. They made Mara sound like a predator, like she'd hunted Edwin down instead of the other way around. "The facts are clear, Your Honor," Pritchard said in his closing argument. "A marriage of 2 days between strangers. A deathbed will written under suspicious circumstances. A child conceived for the sole purpose of securing inheritance. This is not a legitimate union. This is fraud." Everett stood for the defense, calm and thorough. "The facts are these. 2 adults entered into a legal marriage contract. They fulfilled that contract. They produced a child. The will was written by a competent man who knew exactly what he was doing and why. Mrs. Hale has proven herself more than capable of managing the estate. She has broken no laws. She deserves what her husband left her." The judge, a stern man named Harrison, who looked like he'd been carved from granite, listened to both sides without expression. Then he announced he'd review the evidence and issue a ruling within 2 weeks. 2 weeks of waiting, wondering, watching Clara sleep and trying not to think about what would happen if they lost everything. Thomas, tried to help in his own way. "Don't worry, Mama. The judge seems smart. He'll see you're right." "I hope so, sweetheart. And if he doesn't, we'll figure something out. We always do." 10 years old and already carrying more weight than any child should. But he was right about one thing. They always figured it out, one way or another. The ruling came on a Friday. Everett brought the news himself, riding out to the farm instead of sending a messenger. Mara met him on the porch with Clara on her hip and her heart in her throat. "We won," Everett said, climbing down from his horse. The relief hit so hard, Mara had to sit down. "We won?" Judge Harrison upheld the will in its entirety. He said the marriage was legal, Edwin was competent, and Thomas Hale's claims were without merit. "It's over, Mara. The farm is yours." Mara couldn't speak, just held Clara tighter and felt the weight she'd been carrying for 8 months finally lift. "There's more," Everett continued. Harrison ordered Thomas to pay court costs, and he included language in the ruling that prevents any future challenges to Clara's legitimacy. She's Edwin Hale's legal heir, no question. No one can contest that now. "Oh, thank—" Mara stopped herself. "Thank what? Thank luck? Thank Edwin's thorough planning? Thank her own stubborn refusal to back down? Thank all of it, maybe." "What about Thomas Hale?" she asked. "Will he appeal?" "He can try, but Harrison's ruling is solid. And between us, I don't think Thomas has the money for an appeal. He's borrowed heavily against an inheritance he's not getting. His creditors are circling." Good, Mara thought viciously. Let him suffer the way he tried to make her suffer. But out loud she just said, "Thank you, Everett, for everything." "You did the hard part. I just handled the paperwork." He tipped his hat. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hale. You earned this." After he left, Mara walked through the house that was legally, irrevocably hers now. Edwin's office. The parlor where they'd made their bargain. The bedroom where she'd conceived Clara. The field stretching out in every direction, green with spring planting. All of it hers. All of it Clara's. She found Thomas in the barn, helping Samuel with the horses. "We won," she said. Thomas looked up, grinned. "Really? Really? The farm is ours. No one can take it away now." He whooped and ran to hug her, careful of Clara. "I knew it. I knew you'd win." Samuel smiled from the shadows. Mr. Edwin would be proud. Would he? Mara didn't know. Edwin had been practical above all else, had built this all on cold calculation. But maybe somewhere in that calculating mind there'd been hope that she'd pull it off, that his gamble on a desperate widow would pay off. It had paid off. For both of them. That night, after Thomas was asleep and Clara was fed and drowsing, Mara walked up to the hill where Edwin was buried. The grave had a simple stone now, his name and dates and nothing else. He hadn't been a man for flowery epitaphs. She stood there with Clara in her arms and said, "I did it. I kept my promise. The farm is safe." The wind moved through the grass. Clara made a small sound in her sleep. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you for what you asked of me," Mara continued, "for turning me into someone who'd trade herself for security. But I understand why you did it. And I'll make sure it wasn't for nothing." More silence. What had she expected? Absolution from a dead man? Clara's beautiful, she said. She has your hair, your stubbornness too, I think. She's going to be strong. I'll make sure of it. Clara stirred, opened her eyes, looked up at Mara with that unfocused infant gaze. We're going to be okay, Mara told her daughter. All of us. Your brother, you, me, this farm. We're going to build something good here. Something worth all this. The baby yawned and went back to sleep, unimpressed by promises or legacies or anything beyond warmth and milk. Mara walked back down the hill as the sun set over land that stretched farther than she could see. Somewhere out there, workers were finishing the day's labor, families were sitting down to dinner, children were playing in the last light. All of them depending on this place, on her decisions, on her ability to keep what Edwin had built alive. It was terrifying, it was overwhelming, it was hers. And somehow, standing there with Clara in her arms and the farmhouse lights beckoning, Mara felt something she hadn't expected to feel ever again. Not happiness exactly, not peace, but something close enough to keep going, something that felt almost like home. The first crisis came in July, 2 months after the court ruling, when the tobacco crop started showing blight. Mara saw it during her morning walk through the fields, dark spots spreading across the leaves, the telltale signs of a fungus that could wipe out the entire harvest if it wasn't stopped fast. She'd read about it in Edwin's notes, knew enough to be terrified. She found Samuel in the equipment barn. We have blight in the north field. His face went gray. How bad? Bad enough. Maybe a quarter of the crop already affected. We need to cut it out, now, before it spreads. How much will we lose? Samuel hesitated. If we're lucky and work fast, maybe 30% of the tobacco. If we're not lucky, he didn't finish, didn't need to. Mara thought fast. Tobacco was their biggest cash crop. Losing 30% would hurt, but they'd survive. Losing more than that would mean defaulting on contracts, failing to pay workers, watching everything Edwin built start to crumble. Get every available hand to the north field, she said. Anyone who can tell healthy plants from sick ones. We cut out everything infected and burn it, today. Yes, ma'am. By noon, 20 people were working the field under the brutal summer sun, cutting and hauling infected plants to a burn pile that sent black smoke into the sky. Mara worked alongside them, Clara strapped to her back in a sling, sweat soaking through her dress. You shouldn't be out here, Margaret scolded when she brought water. You just had a baby. You need rest. I need this crop to survive more than I need rest. The men can handle it. The men need to see I'm not sitting in the house while they work. Mara took the water, drank deeply. Besides, I know what to look for. Edwin taught me. Margaret frowned but didn't argue further. She took Clara back to the house, leaving Mara free to work until her hands blistered and her back screamed. By evening, they'd cut out every visibly infected plant. Samuel walked the rows one more time, checking, then came to where Mara sat on a water barrel trying to catch her breath. I think we got it, he said, but we won't know for sure until tomorrow. If new spots show up, then we do this again tomorrow. You can't keep working like this. You're exhausted. Mara looked at him, this man who'd served Edwin faithfully for 30 years, who'd stayed on when she took over, who'd never once questioned her authority even when she was making it up as she went. I'm scared, Samuel, she admitted. I'm terrified I'm going to fail at this, that I'll lose the farm, lose everything, prove Thomas Hale right about me being incompetent. Samuel sat down beside her, joints creaking. Mr. Edwin was scared too, every year, every harvest. He just didn't show it. Being scared doesn't mean you're failing. It means you understand what's at stake. Did he ever tell you about our arrangement? Didn't have to. I have eyes. Samuel was quiet for a moment. I thought it was wrong at first. Thought he was taking advantage of your situation. But then I watched you, saw how hard you worked to learn everything, how you cared about the people here, how you fought for this place. And I realized Mr. Edwin didn't take advantage. He made a good choice. The words settled something in Mara's chest that had been loose and rattling since Edwin died. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing, and maybe take a day off before you collapse. The blight didn't spread. By the end of the week, the remaining tobacco was growing strong, and the crisis had passed. But it had cost them. in lost crop value, in emergency labor expenses, in the physical toll on everyone who'd worked 18-hour days to save what they could. Mara spent a long night in Edwin's office doing math that made her head hurt. They'd make it through the season, but barely. One more crisis like that, and they'd be in real trouble. She was still bent over the ledgers when Thomas knocked on the doorframe. "Mama, you coming to bed?" Mara looked up. Her son stood there in his nightshirt, hair sticking up, looking worried. When had he started worrying about her instead of the other way around? "Soon, sweetheart." "You always say that." He came in, sat in the chair across from her. "Are we in trouble? With money?" "Why would you ask that?" "I heard some of the workers talking. They said the blight cost us a lot." Mara set down her pencil. "It cost us, yes, but we'll be okay. We saved most of the crop." "But if we hadn't? If it had spread?" "It didn't. That's what matters." Thomas picked at a loose thread on his nightshirt. "Sometimes I feel bad. About all this. Like it's my fault you had to marry Mr. Hale and go through all this hard stuff just because I got sick." Mara's heart cracked. "Thomas, no. Look at me." She waited until he met her eyes. "None of this is your fault. You were a child who got sick. I made the choices I made because I love you, because saving you was worth any price. Do you understand?" "I guess." "No guessing. That's the truth. And honestly, this farm, this life, it's hard, but it's ours. We're building something here, something good. That's not a burden. It's a gift." "Even though you didn't love Mr. Hale?" The question caught her off guard. "Who told you that?" "I heard you say it. During the lawsuit. I was listening from the hallway." Of course he was. Thomas had always been too smart and too curious for his own good. "I didn't love him," Mara said carefully. "Not the way people love in stories. But I respected him. I was grateful to him. And I think, toward the end, I understood him. That's a different kind of caring." "Do you think he loved you?" "No, he needed me." "That's not the same thing." Thomas thought about this. "I think he liked you, though. He was always nicer when you were in the room, less scary." "He wasn't scary. He was just direct." "That's a fancy word for scary." Thomas smiled. "But I'm glad he helped us, even if it was weird and complicated." "Me too, sweetheart. Now go to bed. It's late." After he left, Mara sat in the quiet office and thought about Edwin. The truth was, she didn't know if he'd liked her. Respected her decision-making, yes. Appreciated her willingness to uphold their bargain, certainly. But liked her as a person? She had no idea. And it didn't matter anymore. Edwin was dead. The farm was hers, and she had 2 children depending on her to make this work. She went back to the ledgers and worked until the numbers started making sense again. August brought a different kind of crisis. Clara got sick. It started with fussiness, which wasn't unusual for a 4-month-old. But then came the fever, the rasping cough, the way she couldn't seem to catch her breath. Mara sent for Dr. Morehouse, who examined Clara with the same careful attention he'd given Thomas years ago. "It's croup," he said, "common in infants, usually passes on its own, but we need to watch her carefully. If the breathing gets worse, if the fever spikes higher, it could turn into pneumonia." Mara's blood went cold. She'd watched Thomas nearly die from illness. She couldn't do it again, couldn't sit by another sickbed wondering if this child would make it through. "What do I do?" "Keep her upright. Steam helps. Run hot water. Let her breathe the vapor. Cool cloths for the fever. And watch. If she starts turning blue around the lips, if she stops breathing properly, you send for me immediately." For 3 days, Mara barely slept. She held Clara upright, walked the floors, ran steam in the bathroom until the wallpaper started peeling. Margaret helped when she could, but ultimately it was Mara's arms Clara wanted, Mara's voice that soothed her when the coughing got bad. Thomas brought his school books into Clara's room and did lessons there so Mara wouldn't be alone. He'd fetch water, bring food, read aloud when his mother's voice gave out from singing lullabies. "She's going to be okay, right?" he asked on the 3rd night, watching his sister struggle to breathe. "Yes," Mara said, because what else could she say? "You don't sound sure." "I'm sure." She wasn't, but she needed to be. Needed to believe that after everything she'd sacrificed, after every compromise she'd made, she wouldn't lose this child too. Clara's fever broke on the 4th day. The cough loosened, the breathing eased, and by the 5th day she was nursing normally again, fussing in that healthy, irritated way babies had when they felt better but were still annoyed about having been sick. Mara cried for the first time since Edwin's funeral, just sat in the rocking chair holding Clara and let the fear and relief pour out in great heaving sobs. Margaret found her like that. "Oh, honey, she's all right now. The worst is over." "I can't keep doing this," Mara said. "I can't keep almost losing them." "You're not losing anyone. Clara's fine. Thomas is healthy as a horse. You're doing everything right." "It doesn't feel like it. It feels like I'm constantly one disaster away from everything falling apart." Margaret sat down, took Mara's hand. "That's what life is. One disaster away from falling apart. All of us, all the time. The difference is you keep standing back up. You keep fighting. That's what makes you strong." "I don't feel strong. I feel exhausted." Those are the same things sometimes. That night, with Clara sleeping peacefully in her cradle and Thomas snoring in the next room, Mara stood at the window and looked out at the farm. The fields were dark under the moon, the barn a shadow against the sky. Somewhere out there, families were sleeping in the workers' cabins, depending on her to keep this place running, to make the decisions that would feed them through winter. The weight of it was crushing, but she carried it anyway, because what choice did she have? September brought better news. The harvest came in strong despite the blight losses, and the buyers paid fair prices. Mara negotiated hard, using everything Edwin had taught her about reading market trends and not showing desperation. She got top dollar for their tobacco and solid prices for the corn. When she sat down to do the year-end accounts, they showed a profit. Not huge, but real. Enough to pay all those workers, set aside reserves, even invest in some improvements Edwin had planned but never executed. "We did it," she told Thomas at dinner. "We made it through our first full year." Thomas grinned around a mouthful of chicken. "Does that mean we're rich?" "It means we're solvent." "That's better than rich." "What's solvent mean?" "It means we have enough money to pay our debts and keep going. Rich is having extra. We're not there yet." Clara, now 6 months old and sitting in a high chair, banged her spoon and laughed. She was a happy baby when she wasn't sick, all smiles and curiosity. She had Edwin's coloring but Mara's expressions, a mix that sometimes caught Mara off guard. "Can we get a dog?" Thomas asked. "Samuel's grandson got a puppy, and it's really nice." "We have a farm full of animals." "That's not the same. I want a dog that's mine, that can sleep in my room." Mara considered it. A dog was an expense, another mouth to feed, another responsibility. But Thomas had given up so much when they came here. His friends, his old life, the simplicity of childhood. He'd adapted without complaint, had become the man of the house in ways that broke her heart. "All right," she said, "but you're responsible for feeding it and training it." Thomas's face lit up. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it. Ask Samuel if his grandson's dog had puppies. If not, we'll find one somewhere else." After dinner, with Clara in bed and Thomas reading by lamplight, Mara went to Edwin's grave again. It had become a habit, visiting him when she had news, good or bad, like he was her business partner instead of her dead husband. "We turned a profit," she told the headstone. "Not much, but enough. The farm's stable. Clara's healthy. Thomas wants a dog." She paused. "I think you'd be pleased, or at least not disappointed." The wind moved through the grass. Down in the valley, lights flickered in the workers' cabins. "I'm getting better at this," Mara continued. "Running things, making decisions. I don't second-guess myself as much. Don't wake up wondering if I'm about to ruin everything you built." She sat on the grass, not caring that it was damp. "I still don't forgive you, you know, for putting me in this position, for making me choose between my son and my dignity. That was cruel, even if it was necessary." More silence. What had she expected? An apology from beyond the grave? But I understand it better now. The weight of keeping all these people fed and safe. How it makes you do things you never thought you'd do. How desperation strips away all the pretty ideals and leaves just survival. She pulled her shawl tighter. "You weren't a good man, Edwin, but you weren't evil either. You were just trapped, same as me." Clara started crying in the house. Mara could hear her even from the hill. She stood, brushed off her skirt. "I should go. The baby needs me." She touched the headstone briefly. Thank you for trusting me with this. I won't let you down. Walking back down the hill, Mara realized she meant it. She wouldn't let Edwin down, wouldn't let this farm fail, wouldn't let all his planning and sacrifice be for nothing. Not because she loved him, not even because she owed him, but because this was hers now, truly hers, and she'd protect what was hers with everything she had. Winter came hard that year, early snow and bitter cold that tested every repair Mara had made to the workers' cabins. She spent money she'd planned to save, making sure everyone had solid roofs and working stoves. The workers noticed, talked about it amongst themselves, how the new Mrs. Hale cared more about people than profits, how she was different from most landowners who treated workers like equipment. Mara didn't do it to be different. She did it because letting people freeze while she sat in a warm house felt wrong. Simple as that. But the goodwill it bought her was real. When problems came up, workers came to her directly instead of complaining amongst themselves. When decisions needed making, they trusted her judgment. Slowly, without her quite noticing, she'd become not just the owner, but the leader. One evening in December, she was reviewing spring planting plans when Samuel knocked. "Ma'am, there's a situation with the Morrison family. James broke his leg pretty bad. Can't work for at least 2 months." Mara's first thought was financial. James was one of her best workers. Losing him for 2 months would hurt. Her second thought was human. James had a wife and 3 children who depended on his wages. "How bad is the leg?" "Dr. Morehouse said it, but he needs rest. Can't put weight on it. Tell James his wages continue while he recovers, and find out what light work his wife can do. Mending, maybe, or kitchen help for Margaret. We'll make sure they're covered." Samuel nodded slowly. "That's generous, ma'am. That's decent. There's a difference." After he left, Mara stared at the ledger and the number she'd just committed to paying for work that wouldn't get done. Edwin would have called her soft, probably. Would have said business was business, that workers understood the risks. But Edwin wasn't here, and this was her farm now. She'd run it her way. Christmas came quiet. They had a small celebration. Thomas got his dog, a mutt puppy named Duke, who immediately claimed Thomas's bed. Clara got a wooden rattle that Samuel had carved. Mara got a shawl from Margaret, and the knowledge that they'd made it through another season intact. In January, unexpected news arrived. Thomas Hale was dead. The message came from his lawyer, a terse note explaining that Thomas had died of a sudden heart failure. The funeral had already happened. His debts exceeded his assets. The estate was bankrupt. Mara read the letter twice, waiting to feel something. Relief, maybe, or vindication. But there was just emptiness. "Is that the mean Thomas?" her Thomas asked, reading over her shoulder. "Yes." "Is it bad that I'm not sad?" "No, he wasn't kind to us." "Are you sad?" Mara thought about it. "No, just tired. He wasted his whole life fighting over things he didn't build, didn't earn. That's sad in its own way, but it's not my sadness to carry." She burned the letter and didn't think about Thomas Hale again. Spring brought Clara's first birthday and another strong planting season. Thomas turned 11 and started growing into the lanky, awkward phase that came before becoming a man. The farm settled into rhythms Mara understood now, cycles she could predict and plan for. She was in the fields one morning when a stranger rode up, well-dressed, professional, clearly not a local. "Mrs. Hale?" "That's me." He introduced himself as Harrison Pritchard, no relation to the lawyer who'd tried to destroy her. He represented a railroad company looking to buy right-of-way through her land. "We're extending the line from Louisville to Lexington," he explained. "Your property sits on the most direct route. We're prepared to offer generous compensation." Mara listened to his pitch, to the numbers he threw around, to the promises of how the railroad would bring prosperity to the whole region. She also noticed which route he was proposing, right through her best timberland. "How much?" she asked. $50,000 for a 100-foot easement. It was a staggering amount, more than the farm earned in 5 years, enough to expand, modernize, set up Thomas and Clara for life. But it would also cut the property in half, destroy prime timber, and give the railroad permanent access through her land. "I'll need to think about it," Mara said. "We need an answer within 2 weeks. After that, we'll approach alternative routes." After he left, Mara called Samuel and her crew bosses together. "Railroad wants to buy right-of-way. What do you think?" They discussed it for an hour. The The benefits, the drawbacks, what it would mean for the farm's future. Samuel was against it, thought it would do more harm than good. The younger workers saw opportunity. Finally, Mara made her decision. No, the route they want would destroy too much. If they can propose a different path that doesn't gut our timberland, we can talk. Otherwise, no. That's a lot of money to turn down, one of the crew bosses said. It's a lot of land to give up. Money spends, land lasts. She sent Pritchard a letter with her counter-proposal, a different route along the property's edge that would require more engineering but less destruction. He came back a week later with a revised offer, $30,000 for the edge route. They negotiated for another month before settling on $35,000. The contract was signed in April, the first payment came in May, and suddenly Mara had more money than she'd ever imagined having. "What are you going to do with it?" Margaret asked. Mara had thought about little else. Expand the dairy operation, there's money in milk and cheese, improve the workers' cabins, they've needed real upgrades for years. Set aside trust funds for Thomas and Clara's education, and save the rest. Save it for what? For the next crisis. Because there's always a next crisis. She was right about that. July brought drought, and they lost part of the corn crop. September brought a worker rebellion when Mara had to cut wages temporarily to cover unexpected repairs. November brought Clara's second bout of croup, not as bad as the first, but terrifying nonetheless. But each crisis Mara handled, each problem she solved. And slowly, the farm stopped feeling like Edwin's legacy and started feeling like hers. One evening, 2 years after Edwin's death, Mara stood on the hill at his grave and realized she couldn't remember exactly what his voice sounded like. The memory was fading, replaced by the daily reality of running what he'd left her. "I don't come up here much anymore," she told the headstone. "Too busy, you'd understand that." Clara was walking now, talking in broken sentences, fearless and curious about everything. Thomas was 13, tall and serious, already helping with real farm work. The land was prosperous, the workers were paid, and Mara's reputation as a fair but tough boss had spread through the county. "I did it," she said to Edwin's memory. "Everything you asked. I gave you an heir. I protected the farm. I proved I belonged here." The wind answered, "Nothing more. I don't hate you anymore. That probably doesn't matter to you being dead, but I thought you should know I don't hate you, and I don't regret it. What we did, what we built, it was worth it." She turned to go, then stopped. "I hope you're at peace, wherever you are. I hope you know it worked. Your plan, your gamble, it all worked." Walking back down the hill in the fading light, Mara felt something settle in her chest. Not closure exactly, not forgiveness or love or any of the clean emotions stories promised. Just acceptance. Just the knowledge that she'd survived something that should have broken her, and instead it had made her into someone stronger, someone who could stand on this land and call it home without flinching at what she'd traded to get here. Someone who'd earned every inch of it. 5 years after Edwin's death, the farm had transformed into something even he might not have recognized. The dairy operation Mara built brought in steady income year-round. The workers' cabins had solid roofs, glass windows, and stoves that actually worked. The fields rotated on a schedule that kept the soil rich, and the tobacco buyers knew better than to try lowballing Mrs. Hale. She'd walk away from a deal faster than they could apologize. But success brought new complications, and on a humid morning in June of 1889, Mara faced one she hadn't anticipated. Thomas came into the kitchen looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. At 16, he was nearly as tall as Robert had been, with his father's build and his mother's stubborn jaw. He'd been working the farm full-time since his 14th birthday, turning into the kind of man people trusted with responsibility. "Mama, we need to talk." Mara looked up from the account she was reviewing. Clara was outside with Margaret, chasing chickens and making a game of it. The house was quiet. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. He sat down heavily. "I don't want to run this farm." The words hit like a physical blow. Mara set down her pencil carefully. "What?" "I've been thinking about it for a while. I love it here, and I'm grateful for everything. You know I am. But running this place, doing what you do every day, making all these decisions, it's not what I want." Mara's mind raced. She'd assumed foolishly maybe, that Thomas would take over eventually, that she was building this for him as much as for Clara, that her son would want what she'd fought so hard to give him. Then what do you want? Thomas looked miserable. I want to be a teacher. I've been talking to Mr. Peterson at the school and he thinks I'd be good at it. There's a normal school in Lexington that trains teachers. I could apply, maybe start next year. A teacher? Mara tried to process this. Teachers don't make much money. I know, but I'd be good at it and I'd be happy. He met her eyes. I'm not like you, Mama. I can't carry all this weight. I don't want to. Does that make me weak? No. The answer came automatically, truthfully. No, it makes you honest. You're disappointed. She was, but not in the way he thought. Disappointed that her assumptions were wrong, that the future she'd imagined wasn't the one coming. But disappointed in Thomas himself? Never. I'm proud of you for knowing what you want. That takes courage. She reached across the table, took his hand. If teaching is what makes you happy, then that's what you should do. Really? Really? This farm will be Clara's someday anyway. She's Edwin's blood heir. You're free to be whoever you want to be. Thomas's relief was visible. I was so scared to tell you. I thought you'd be angry. I'm many things, Thomas. Angry isn't one of them. She paused. When would you leave? Not until spring. I'll work through the harvest, help get everything ready for winter. And I'll come back summers to help if you need me. Fair enough? Mara squeezed his hand. But you need to tell Clara yourself. She worships you. She should hear it from you, not me. After Thomas left, lighter, freer, Mara sat alone in the kitchen and let herself feel the loss. Not of Thomas, who'd always be her son, but of the idea she'd carried for years, the vision of passing this farm to him, of watching him build on what she'd built. That future was gone. Time to imagine a different one. She found Clara in the barn, feeding apples to the horses. At 5 years old, she was fearless in a way that both terrified and delighted Mara. She climbed things she shouldn't, talked to strangers without hesitation, and had opinions about everything. Mama, watch this! Clara clambered up on the fence rail, balancing precariously. Careful, sweetheart. I'm always careful. She jumped down, landed hard, laughed. Can I ride today? You promised. Later. I need to talk to you about something first. They sat on hay bales, and Mara tried to figure out how to explain complicated adult things to a 5-year-old. You know how this farm will be yours someday? Clara nodded. Because Papa Edwin left it to me. Papa Edwin. Clara had never known him, but she'd absorbed the stories, good and bad, and created her own version of the father she'd never met. Mara never corrected her, never said he was just a business arrangement. Children deserved their myths. That's right. And Thomas is going to go away to school soon to become a teacher. Thomas is leaving? Clara's face crumpled. Not forever, just to learn. He'll come back to visit. But who will help with the farm? You and me. We'll figure it out together. Clara considered this seriously. I'm too little to help much. You won't always be little, and when you're bigger, you'll learn everything. How to run this place, how to make decisions, how to take care of everyone who depends on us. Like you do? Like I do? Clara brightened. Can I boss people around too? Mara laughed despite herself. Being in charge isn't about bossing people around. It's about making sure everyone's taken care of. Big difference. Oh, Clara thought about this. That sounds hard. It is hard. But you're tough. You can handle it. Because I'm Papa Edwin's daughter? Because you're you. Being tough comes from what you do, not who your parents were. Clara jumped up, already moving on to the next thing. Can I ride now? Yes, but stay in the paddock and wear your hat. Watching Clara run off, all energy and confidence, Mara felt something shift in her chest. This child, conceived in desperation, born into a lawsuit, raised in the shadow of a bargain, was becoming her own person. Someone who'd never known poverty or desperation, who took security for granted because it was all she'd ever known. Mara had bought that security with her dignity and her body and years of her life. And watching Clara laugh as Samuel helped her onto the gentlest mare, Mara thought maybe, just maybe, it had been worth it. The years rolled forward with the relentless pace of farm life. Thomas left for normal school and came back different, more confident, more himself. He met a girl there, a blacksmith's daughter named Sarah, who laughed loud and didn't care what anyone thought. They married the summer Thomas turned 20, a simple ceremony on the farm with everyone invited. Mara stood in the crowd and watched her son promise his life to someone else, watched him build something that had nothing to do with desperate bargains or calculated exchanges. He married for love, simple and pure, and Mara was glad for him. Clara grew like a weed, all legs and attitude. By 8, she could ride better than most of the men. By 10, she was helping with the accounts, her quick mind absorbing numbers the way Thomas had absorbed books. By 12, she was arguing with Mara about crop rotations and worker wages, holding her own in debates that would have intimidated grown men. "You're too soft on the workers," Clara said one evening, reviewing the payroll. "And you're too hard," Mara countered. "These are people, not numbers in a ledger. People who need to earn their pay. People who work harder when they're treated fairly." Clara threw up her hands. "You sound like a socialist, and you sound like your father." The comparison stopped Clara cold. She rarely talked about Edwin, had no memories of him beyond what others told her. But she'd inherited something from him, that calculating mind, that ability to see people as variables in an equation. "Is that bad?" Clara asked quietly. Mara softened. "No. Your father built something remarkable here. His way worked, but there's more than one way to lead. You'll figure out your own." "What if my way is wrong?" "Then you'll make mistakes and learn from them, same as everyone else." Clara picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying him? The whole arrangement?" It was the first time Clara had asked directly. Mara had known the question was coming eventually. Clara was too smart not to piece together the strangeness of her parents' marriage. "Sometimes," Mara said honestly, "I regret that I had to make that choice, that the world is built in a way that forces women to trade themselves for security. But do I regret that it brought me here, to this life, to you? No, never." "Even though you didn't love him?" "Even though. Love isn't the only thing that matters. Sometimes survival matters more. Sometimes making hard choices and living with them matters more." Clara nodded slowly, absorbing this. "I don't think I'll ever get married." Mara smiled. "You say that now. I mean it. Marriage looks like giving up too much. Not if you do it right. Look at Thomas and Sarah. They're partners. Equals." "That's different. Thomas isn't in charge of anything. Sarah doesn't have to give up power because Thomas never had it to begin with." Clara looked at Mara directly. "But you had to give up everything to get power. And I already have power because of what you did. Why would I risk that?" The logic was sound, cold, and clear as Edwin's had been. Mara saw her daughter's future stretching out. This farm, this authority, this isolation that came with being the woman in charge. "Power isn't everything," Mara said quietly. "Says the woman who fought a lawsuit to keep it." "I fought to keep this farm. That's not the same thing." "Isn't it?" They left it there, both of them right in different ways, both of them shaped by the bargain that had made this life possible. When Clara turned 16, disaster struck again, not on the farm this time, but in town. The Barton County Bank collapsed, taking half the county's savings with it. Mara had money spread across 3 banks, a lesson learned from Edwin about never putting all your eggs in one basket. But many of the workers had kept their savings in Barton County, and overnight they lost everything. Mara called a meeting in the barn, all 30 workers and their families packed in. "I know you're scared," she said, standing on a hay bale so everyone could see her. "I know some of you lost everything you'd saved, but this farm is stable. Your wages are safe. No one is getting let go because of the bank." "Easy for you to say," someone called out. "You're not the one who lost everything." "You're right. I was lucky. I diversified. But that doesn't help you now." Mara had been thinking about this all night, running numbers, weighing options. "Here's what I'm offering. Anyone who lost money in the bank collapse, I'll match what you lost up to 2 months' wages. It won't replace everything, but it'll help." Silence. Then someone asked, "Why would you do that?" "Because this farm works because you work. Because when Edwin Hale built this place, he built it on the understanding that we take care of each other. I'm just honoring that." It cost Mara nearly $8,000, Money that could have gone to improvements, to expansion, to Clara's future. But it bought something more valuable than money. Loyalty. The kind of loyalty that couldn't be purchased, only earned. Clara was furious when she found out. $8,000! Do you know what we could have done with that money? I know exactly what we did with it. We kept 30 families from destitution. That's not our responsibility. It absolutely is our responsibility. Mara's patience snapped. This farm doesn't exist in isolation. Those families work our land, harvest our crops, make our profits possible. When they suffer, we suffer. When they're secure, we're secure. That's how this works. That's not how business works. Then maybe business needs to work differently. They stood facing each other, two women who'd never quite figured out how to be on the same side. Clara had Edwin's mind and Mara's stubbornness, a combination that made for spectacular arguments. I'm trying to teach you something, Mara said, forcing herself calm. Power without responsibility is tyranny. Your father understood that, even if he didn't always show it. He took care of the people here because he knew if he didn't, everything would fall apart. He also married you like you were a business transaction. Should I learn that from him too? The words landed like a slap. Clara looked immediately sorry, but the damage was done. Get out, Mara said quietly. Mama, I said get out. After Clara left, Mara sat in Edwin's office, her office now, though she still thought of it as his, and stared at the ledgers. The numbers didn't lie. 8,000 was a lot. It would set them back, force them to delay projects, tighten belts. But the alternative, watching families she'd worked with for years fall into poverty while she sat on money she didn't strictly need, that was impossible. Margaret found her there an hour later. Clara's crying in the barn, she reported. Good. She should feel bad. She's 16. 16-year-olds say terrible things. You remember being 16? I was married to Robert at 16. I didn't have time for terrible things. Margaret sat down uninvited. That girl loves you more than anything. She's just scared. Scared of what? Of being like Edwin. Of being the kind of person who sees people as numbers. Of turning into what she's supposed to be instead of who she is. Margaret folded her hands. You've done everything right, Mara. You've built something good here, but Clara's carrying weight you put on her shoulders before she could walk. That's a lot for anyone. What am I supposed to do? She'll inherit this place. She needs to be ready. Maybe she needs to be young first, make mistakes, figure out who she is when she's not standing in Edwin's shadow or yours. Mara knew Margaret was right, but didn't want to admit it. She'd spent 16 years preparing Clara to run this farm, teaching her to be strong and smart and ruthless when necessary. She'd created exactly what she'd set out to create. And somewhere in that creation, she'd forgotten to let Clara just be a child. That night, Mara went to the barn and found Clara brushing down the horses, her face still blotchy from crying. I'm sorry, Clara said immediately. What I said was cruel. I didn't mean it. You did mean it. That's why it hurt. Mara leaned against the stall door. But you weren't entirely wrong. My marriage to your father was a transaction. That's the truth. And I've never lied to you about it. Then why did it hurt you when I said it? Because there's a difference between knowing something and having it thrown in your face by your daughter. Mara came into the stall, took the brush from Clara's hands. Let me tell you something I've never told you before. When I married Edwin, I thought I was selling myself, thought I was becoming something less than human. But over the years, I realized something. I didn't sell myself. I invested myself. In this farm, in this community, in you and Thomas. And that investment paid off in ways I never imagined. How can you say that? You gave up everything for a man you didn't love. I gave up some things to gain others. That's called making choices, not selling out. Mara met Clara's eyes. And I need you to understand something. You're not me. You don't have to make the choices I made. You don't have to sacrifice what I sacrificed. I built this so you wouldn't have to. Then why are you always pushing me to be harder, to be more like Papa Edwin? Because I'm terrified you'll be too soft. That someone will take advantage of you, take this farm from you, undo everything I've fought for. Mara's voice cracked. I'm terrified of failing you, of not preparing you enough, of leaving you vulnerable the way I was vulnerable. Clara threw her arms around Mara suddenly, fiercely. You could never fail me. You're the strongest person I know. You're my hero. Mara held her daughter and let herself cry for the first time in years. Not sad tears exactly. more like release. The weight she'd carried since that day in Edwin's parlor finally had somewhere to go. "I love you," she said into Clara's hair. "Even when we fight, even when you say terrible things, I love you more than this farm, more than anything." "I love you too, Mama, and I'm sorry. I'll try to be better." "Don't try to be better, just try to be you." They stood like that for a long time, mother and daughter, two women shaped by the same bargain but walking different paths forward. The years continued their march. Thomas had 3 children and brought them to the farm every summer, filling the house with noise and chaos that Mara secretly loved. Sarah and Mara became friends, bonding over the shared experience of loving difficult men who'd rather read than work with their hands. Clara grew into a woman who commanded respect without demanding it. She was tough when she needed to be, compassionate when she could be, and smart enough to know the difference. She never married, kept her promise about that, but she had suitors, men who wanted the farm more than the woman, mostly, though a few genuinely cared for her. "I don't need a husband," Clara told Mara when she turned 25. "I have this farm. I have purpose. I have you. What else is there?" Mara wanted to say love, partnership, someone to share the burden with, but she'd lived without those things and survived. Who was she to insist Clara needed them? "Nothing," she said. "There's nothing else if you're happy." "I am happy." "Are you?" The question caught Mara off guard. Was she happy? She'd been so busy surviving, building, protecting that she'd never stopped to ask. "I think so," she said slowly. "I'm proud of what we've built. I'm proud of you and Thomas. I'm grateful for this life, even if I didn't choose it the way I would have wanted. Is that happiness?" "Close enough," Clara said, smiling. On Mara's 60th birthday, the community threw her a party in the town hall. Everyone came, workers and their families, merchants she'd done business with for decades, even the new bank president. They gave speeches about her fairness, her leadership, her contributions to Barton County. Mara sat through it feeling like a fraud. She wasn't special. She'd just done what needed doing, made the choices she had to make, survived what needed surviving. But when Clara stood up to speak, Mara paid attention. "My mother won't like me saying this, but she's extraordinary. Not because she's perfect. She's not. She's stubborn and overprotective and sometimes too generous for her own good." Laughter from the crowd. "But 30 years ago, she made an impossible choice. She traded everything she was for a chance at something better. And she didn't just save one life. She saved dozens. Everyone in this room has been touched by her decisions, her compassion, her refusal to let anyone suffer if she could help it." Clara's voice got stronger. "I grew up hearing whispers about how my parents married, about the arrangement, the contract, the transaction. People love to gossip about things they don't understand. But here's what those people don't know. My mother didn't sell herself. She fought for herself, for her son, for me, for every person who works our land. She took a terrible situation and built something beautiful from it. That's not weakness, that's strength." The applause was thunderous. Mara stood overwhelmed and Clara hugged her. "Thank you," Mara whispered. "I meant every word." That night, walking through the farm she'd run for 3 decades, Mara thought about everything that had changed. The scared widow who'd accepted Edwin's proposal was gone, replaced by someone harder and softer at the same time. Someone who'd learned that strength came in different forms, the strength to compromise, to endure, to love, even when love wasn't part of the deal. She climbed the hill to Edwin's grave one last time. The headstone was weathered now, harder to read in the fading light. "We did it," she told him. "Everything you wanted. The farm's thriving. Clara's ready to take over. Thomas is happy. All those people you worried about, they're taken care of." The wind moved through the grass, familiar and constant. "I wish you could see her, Clara. She's got your mind and my heart. Best of both of us." Mara smiled. "She'll do things differently than you did. Differently than me, too. But she'll do them well. You chose right when you chose me. I chose right when I chose to stay." She touched the headstone one last time. "Thank you, Edwin. For the opportunity, for the trust, for seeing something in me I didn't see in myself. I hope wherever you are, you know it was worth it." Walking back down the hill, Mara saw Clara on the porch with account books, already preparing for next season. The lamps were lit in the workers' cabins. Smoke rose from chimneys. The farm breathed with life and purpose. This was what she'd built from a desperate bargain. Not just a farm, but a community. Not just survival, but a legacy. She'd paid for it with years of her life, with compromises that still sometimes kept her awake at night, with choices that had changed who she fundamentally was. But standing there in the twilight, watching her daughter work and her grandson chase fireflies and the farm settle into evening rhythms, Mara thought maybe the price had been fair after all. Not because the bargain was just. It wasn't. Not because Edwin had been kind. He'd been practical, not kind. But because she'd taken what was offered and made it into something more. She'd survived. She'd thrived. She'd proven that even the hardest choices, made with clear eyes and steady hands, could build something stronger than fate. And in the end, that was enough. Mara went inside, sat down with Clara to review next year's plans, and got back to the work that had defined her life. The work she'd earned. The work that was finally, completely, hers. The bargain was complete. The debt was paid. And what remained was not a transaction but a triumph, imperfect, complicated, and absolutely real.